Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and this is another video in the question and answer series. Today's question is, please explain the term, the religion of Abraham, from the Quran and the Hadiths. This is a very good question, and it does have to do with archaeology. But first, let me suggest that there is a difference between speaking of the religion that Abraham followed and something more formally known in Islam as the religion of Abraham. In the Islamic records, the religion of Abraham is always associated with the term Hanafiyya. We need to understand this term if we are to understand what is meant by the religion of Abraham. The word Hanif means to renunciate or to refuse or to turn their backs on. The origin of this word comes from the story of the patriarch Abraham. He was born and raised in Mesopotamia in an area that was later known as Ur of the Chaldees. That city was a pagan city. Way back in 1862, Henry Rawlinson identified Ur with Tel el-Mukayr, which was near Nasiriyah in southern Iraq. In the early dynastic god lists, such as Farah SF1, the moon god appears immediately after the four leading gods. This is a slightly junior position, and it's confirmed in the text, Nana Suen's journey to Nippur, when Nana brings the first fruit offerings to Enlil, the head of the early Mesopotamian pantheon. The primary symbol of the moon god was a bull. It was thought that the bull was chosen because of the crescent of the waxing moon appears similar to the horns of a bull. This symbolism led to consideration of the moon god as a cowherd, and this is celebrated in some of the ancient writings that they have found there in Ur of the Chaldees. Now, I'm saying all of this because it's clear that Abraham came from a place that's worshipped or celebrated multiple gods. And so it was a pagan place. Now, according to the biblical story, Abraham leaves Mesopotamia and he rejects the worship of multiple gods, and he clings to the worship of the one true God. Now, Islam echoes this story, and this is one of the fundamental reasons why early Muslims identified with Abraham. This rejection of paganism and clinging to the monotheism is the background story of Abraham, as well as for the word Hanif, or the Hanafiyya, or this identity of resisting or leaving paganism. Multiple times in early Islamic records, it tells us that the religion of Abraham was known as Hanafiyya. For instance, in Ibn Hisham 49, we have the story from pre-Islamic times of four men who are of the opinion that their people had corrupted the religion of their father Abraham. And so and they also believed that the stone that they went around was of no account. It could neither hear, nor see, nor hurt, nor help. And so these people said, find yourselves then a religion, for by Allah you have none. So they went their several ways in the land, seeking the Hanafiyya, the religion of Abraham. Now, the word Hanafiyya is mentioned 7 times in Ibn Hisham, and this is enough to illustrate the connection between Hanafiyya and the religion of Abraham. What is interesting here is to note that these men were searching for the Hanafiyya. The idea is that they could find or discover the religion of Abraham. Now, this presents an interesting problem. How could they know if they found it or not? How could they identify the true religion of Abraham from a corrupt version of the religion of Abraham? But these men were going around trying to find this original religion of Abraham because they weren't happy with the pre-Islamic paganism. Now, one of these men, Waraqah bin Nufail ibn Asad, he searched and he found Christianity, and eventually he converted to become a follower of the church. The records do not tell us what church or what form of religion or what their theology was. He simply identified as a Christian and later became a scribe, copying scriptures for those who wanted some of it written down. So before Muhammad came on the scene, there were those who wanted to break from paganism, and they were seeking the original religion of Abraham. Now, why would they do this? Why wouldn't they just seek other religions and try them out? I know lots of people who go around trying different religions to find one that fits their pre-existing assumption of what a good religion should be like. And so they visit different places, temples, holy sites, they attend various seminars and talks until somewhere along the line they end up in some sort of religious group. Or they may tire of the search and just end up as an agnostic, saying, I haven't found the right one yet. Or, as some modern young people are doing, they may even invent their own religion and maybe even invent their own gods. But these men were different. They already knew something of the religion of Abraham, and they wanted to find the true religion of Abraham, not just any religion. Now, I'm going to suggest that the reason for this is archaeological. You see, these four men grew up in a city that had an important religious object. It was in their city, and it was a stone cube, not very high. A man could look over top of it. It wasn't until later, during the lifetime of Muhammad, that it was built higher to protect the sacred items that were inside. Now, Ibn Hisham puts it this way. The Quraysh decided to rebuild the Kaaba when the apostle was 35 years of age. They were planning to roof it and feared to demolish it, for it was made of loose stones about a man's height, and they wanted to raise it and the roof it, because men had stolen part of the treasure of the Kaaba, which used to be in a well in the middle of it. Remember that this was done during the lifetime of Muhammad, when he was a young man. Almost 100 years later, Ibn Zubayr would tear down those additions, leaving the original structure there. But by that time, it was damaged, and so you can see it's still there to this day. Now back to these four men in pre-Islamic times. Tradition told these men that the structure, this Kaaba, was originally built by Abraham. Notice it was built of loose stones. It was not too tall, maybe 5 feet tall. Azraqi gives us the measurements of the cube, but not the height of it. It was just about the height of a man. Now, back in his time, it could have been 5 feet tall. People tended to be shorter back then. On one side of the structure, it was 14.63 meters. The other end was 9.1 meters. The other side was 14.7 meters, and the other end was 10.6 meters. Notice that these sides are all different lengths. It was not a perfect cube. Also note that these measurements are larger than the Kaaba in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Here is a comparison of the measurements to the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia and the Kaaba in Petra. Azraqi's measurements are in red. They do not fit over the Kaaba in Mecca, but they are a perfect fit for the cube in Petra. Even the height fits. So, what was the original Kaaba used for? The Islamic records tell us that it was built by Abraham and known as the House of God. Now, this is very interesting because in the Bible, in the writings of Moses, we have a record of Abraham building another house of God. That was a place known as Bethel or Beit El. El being the early form of a word that was used for God before it morphed from El into Allah. Genesis 12:17 tells us, And the Lord appeared unto Abraham and said, Unto thy seed I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord, who appeared unto him. And he removed from there, and he went to the mountain on the east side of Bethel, or Beit El, and he pitched his tent there, having Bethel on the west, Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. In the first Beit El, there was no building constructed. It was just an altar. And so I would like to suggest that in the second Beit El that Abraham built, this time for Hagar and Ishmael, that there was no building, that it was originally just a large altar. In the biblical record, we have examples of Abraham building 4 altars to the one true God. These were not buildings. They were outside in the open area. Usually they were of stone with no mortar. They were loosely fitted rocks, natural stone, not shaped by human hands. Genesis 12:6 tells us that he built the first altar in Shechem when he arrived from Mesopotamia. Then in Genesis 12:8, he built the altar in Bethel, where God appeared to him. Then he had moved over to the plains of Mamre, and there he built a second altar. And we have a fourth altar that Abraham built. That was on Mount Moriah when he offered his son up to God, and God provided an animal to be sacrificed in its place. Abraham went on occasion, as the records tell us, to the valley of Becca, where his wife Hagar and his son Ishmael were living, and there he built another altar. This is according to the Islamic records, to the Lord, and that was for Hagar and Ishmael, so they too could worship the one true God. It makes perfect sense to me. So as the centuries passed by, people remembered that low stone cube thing over there was built by Abraham. Over time, cultic practices were added to and attached to that location. The whole valley was kind of a sacred place for the children of Ishmael for many generations. Eventually, Hagar and Ishmael died, and they were buried there near the altar. People who were building a low wall around the courtyard came up, and as they were building it, they came to the tombs of Hagar and Ishmael, and so they had to curve the wall and go around the tombs in order to include them in the courtyard. And this is exactly what you find in Petra today. The wall is still there. The curve goes around where the 2 tombs would have been. And the altar stands there, so you can see it today. I believe that is the first Kaaba, and it fits Azraki's measurement. And the courtyard is there, and the curve around is there. Now, notice that Abraham was not alone in this building of altars. Many of the early prophets built them and offered burnt sacrifices on them. Isaac built altars. Moses built altars. David and Solomon built altars. The big change came in the after Abraham was when Moses came along. Now, Moses was a descendant of Abraham, and Moses not only followed the religion of Abraham, but he significantly changed it. He added to it because God revealed to him what was known as the Mosaic Law. And so that Mosaic Law explains how the sacrifices were to be prepared, and how the priests were to dress, and how they were to act, and the procedure of the sacrifices, and the days, and the months, and the year. In effect, Judaism is built on the Mosaic Law, not the religion of Abraham. And the Quran makes a big point of this, pointing out that neither Christians nor Jews followed the religion of Abraham. And so many years later, Christianity comes along. Now, it was also based on Abraham and on the Mosaic Law, but it's also based on the religious teachings of Jesus Christ. But more than just adding to it or reinterpreting the Mosaic Law, Jesus in his death and resurrection fulfilled all the requirements of the Mosaic Law. And that's why the Apostle Paul is an important person to Christians, because he was highly trained in the law, in the Mosaic Law. He was trained in the school of Gamaliel. He was trained to be a member of the Sanhedrin court. And this, Paul, guided by the Spirit of God, explains to us how Jesus was the perfect fulfillment of all of the aspects of the Mosaic Law. Now, let's go back to those 4 men who were searching for the original religion of Abraham. They didn't find it in Judaism. They didn't find it in Christianity. Now, why would they go searching? They wanted to honor and follow Abraham, the man who built that altar in their city. And yet, when they came to Judaism, they didn't feel they found the religion of Abraham. Why? I can only speculate, but from history we know that Judaism had undergone a lot of change. During the Babylonian exile, the Jews began following the Talmud, a set of religious teachings, and they interpreted everything according to the Talmud and the traditions of the great Jewish teachers. So much so that these men, when they examined Judaism, did not recognize the religion of Abraham. The same is true of Christianity. By this time, these men were searching. Christianity had been transformed into an official religion, even into a state church. It was more important to be a member of the church than it was to be personally devoted. And besides, the church was trying to stamp out sacrifices. They never succeeded at it, but in Constantinople, the pressure was on to stop any sacrifices. However, in Samaria, they still offered sacrifices, and down in Petra, the pagan temples were still in operation. So only one of these four men left the group in their search for the true religion of Abraham. He found his answer in Christianity, in the sacrifice that Jesus made to fulfill the yearnings that Abraham had, and all the years of sacrifice that people had made since then, waiting for the ultimate sacrifice to be made. That was Jesus on the cross. So Waraqah ibn Nawfal recognized this, and it was sufficient for him to see that the religion of Abraham was completed in Jesus. But the others kept up their search. And this desire to find the original religion of Abraham was alive when Muhammad was a young man. And Muhammad was influenced by their desire to restore the religion of Abraham. Listen to Ibn Hisham 118. Jafar bin Abdullah bin Abdul Hakam, whose memory went back to the days of the Prophet and who had narration of the tradition, told me that before he left for Mecca, Abu Amir came to the Apostle in Medina to ask him about the religion he had brought. The Hanafiyya, the religion of Abraham. That's what I follow, Muhammad told him. You do not, Abu Amir replied. But I do, insisted Muhammad. Abu Amir then said, You, Muhammad, have introduced into the Hanafiyya things which do not belong in it. I have not. I have only brought to purify it white. May Allah let the liar die a lonely, homeless fugitive. Abu Amir replied, Very well and good, said Muhammad. May Allah so reward him. What actually happened to the enemy of God was that he went to Mecca, and then when the apostle conquered it, he went to Taif, and when Taif became Muslim, he went over to Syria, and he died there a lonely, homeless fugitive. Now, all of that's in Ibn Hisham 118, and Ibn Hisham is among the earliest biographies of the Prophet Muhammad. So, according to this, Muhammad went around preaching the Hanafiyya, the restoration of the religion of Abraham. But what was restored? And what remained from pagan practice? The problem is that well over 1,000 years had passed since the time of Abraham, and many pagan practices had been introduced and included. So one of those was climbing all the way to the top of the mountain and meditating while the sun went down. This was done in remembrance of Abraham. Whenever he came by to visit Hagar and Ishmael, he probably liked to go to the top of the mountain and pray there and meditate. Not that it was part of his religious as a rite, but people remembered afterwards this is something that Abraham liked to do, and so they included it in the religious rites that they would practice on that spot in pre-Islamic times. This is an idea that spills over into Islam, that you try to copy what the Prophet did. Another religious rite that people did in pre-Islamic times was they liked to go 7 times from one mountain cliff over to the other side of the valley to the other mountain cliff, and then back to the other side of the valley. This was done in remembrance of Hagar's desperate search for water, even for people to help her. So the pagans did this 7 times back and forth from one great rock wall on the other side of the valley to the other great rock wall on the other side, not in remembrance of Abraham. It was done in remembrance of Hagar. That was in pre-Islamic times, and it concluded into Islamic times. Another thing that people did was to go around the Kaaba multiple times. This is more reminiscent of worshiping the altar than it is of copying Abraham in offering a sacrifice on the altar. So the emphasis was on the Kaaba building itself, not on the sacrifice, and on the meaning of the sacrifice. Oh, they still offer a sacrifice once a year, but the meaning that Abraham gave to the sacrifice was lost over time. Now, there's something important here. Those who go around today looking for the name Islam or Muslim in the first centuries of Islam do not find it. The very fact that they are looking means they don't know their Islamic religion very well. The original name for the religion of Muhammad was Hanafiyya, meaning rejecting paganism, coming to monotheism. It was identified as the religion of Abraham, not the religion of Muhammad. I meet all kinds of people who claim that Muslims and Islam was not known in the first part of Islamic history. And they think that this is some kind of proof that the religion didn't exist back then. In much the same way, Christians were not known as Christians when Jesus died. The Bible tells us they first became known as Christians in Antioch. That's way over in Acts chapter 11, many years later. Up until that time, the followers of Jesus were known as the Way or as followers of Jesus. That is why I don't like using the word Christian. Far too many people call themselves Christians who are not true followers of Jesus. They may follow some church or some religious teacher, but they are not devoted to Jesus or trusting only in him and his work on the cross as the solution for their sin problem. No, they want Jesus and being a member of a particular church. Or they trust Jesus and some religious rite they've done, perhaps baptism. Or they trust Jesus and maybe the fact that they're good people. Trusting Jesus and something else is not being a true follower of Jesus. It's in trusting in him alone. So I don't like the word Christian. As people, if they ask me, are you a Christian? I tell them, I'm a follower of Jesus. Being called a Christian just means I have a label. And I don't want to be identified with so many of the wrong things that so-called Christians do or teach. In much the same way, the followers of Muhammad were known as Hanafiyya, not Islam or being Muslim. The identification that they had was with something that they left, not with something that they had joined. It wouldn't come for another 100 years when Islam had outgrown the pagan areas and when its identity began to change when they were called something else and they were first called Islam. That doesn't mean it did not exist or that Muhammad did not exist. It means that the original identity was with Hanafiyya and later changed to be Islam. And so Muhammad's religion was known as Hanafiyya. And those who followed him identified as those who had left paganism. In time, this identification was not suitable, as more people joined from other backgrounds. In the end, the idea of Hanafiyya and the identification as the religion of Abraham was lost. In its place, people used a word found in Surah 3, Ayah 19, where it says, the religion of God is to submit. The word here is Islam, or submit. And so the term Islam was used, and the term Hanafiyya passed out of use. Did Muhammad restore the religion of Abraham? I don't think so. The key thing we know about the religion of Abraham is that he built altars and he offered sacrifices to God. There's no record of him going around an altar. There's no record that he went to Marwa and over to Safa and back and forth. There's no record that he stood on a mountain until sundown as part of his religion. Those who are looking for the religion of Abraham usually focus on what rites did Abraham perform? What actions did he do? What words did he say? I urge you to read what Moses wrote about Abraham, because the emphasis that is made is that Abraham had a relationship with God. He spoke with God, God spoke with him. I believe that the religion of Abraham should lead you into a personal relationship with God. The key is sacrifice, and the result is relationship. I am not a Muslim because I do not see in Islam emphasis on sacrifice, nor do I hear any teaching about how to have a personal relationship with God. I find those in Abraham. I find it in Moses. I find that in the life of many of the prophets. I find it a central theme in Jesus, who he was, what he said, what he did, and what he accomplished. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another video in the series Questions and Answers.